Sweet, man. Well, I appreciate you coming on. I'm excited to do this. This is the first time we're trying like a Zoom style interview, but I think this is going to be good because I think the audience loves hearing Cole and Corinne, and I think it would be really cool for our people to get to hear from some of our other coaches. We have a lot of really great coaches on this team, and you're obviously one of them. And so I think this will be a cool episode.
Yeah, this is definitely an awesome opportunity. I think, like you said, it opens the door for so many cool conversations going forward, because what a lot of the people that listen to the podcast don't get to see is the awesome conversations that all the coaches on the back end have. So the more we can involve them, I think the cooler this is going to be.
100%, man. 100%. Why don't you tell the audience a little bit about yourself? Like, how long you've been coaching, what you were doing prior to working for Mind Pump, and then I guess kind of how you ended up here.
Yeah. So I have a kind of a wild background as far as work goes. I actually started most of my professional career in IT. I worked in IT for like 10 years. Towards the back half of that, I started picking up personal training as a part-time passion project. And then kind of on the back end of COVID, made that full switch over. So it's probably been about 8 to 9 years of coaching altogether, with the last 4 or 5 being more full-time. After COVID, I worked at Lifetime, big box gym, worked through being a trainer, then an assistant lead, and then eventually being a team lead. I had a team of about 11 trainers that worked for me, and then kind of rode that until the opportunity at Mind Pump presented itself, and jumped on that as soon as I could.
Yeah. What's been the biggest difference in that switch? Going from like Lifetime, obviously is like big box, corporate. What's been the biggest shift? And obviously there's been a shift too of like, you're doing in-person coaching, now it's online. What have been some of the things that have been, maybe surprising about the change, or, have been welcomed change?
Yeah, for sure. I think one of the biggest welcome changes is the flexibility. There's a couple things with that. One, obviously going from online or in person to online. But also just when you're working for a large company, there's a lot of initiatives that you don't really have a lot of say over and just have to go along with. So it was almost kind of overwhelming sometimes when, we have all these challenges and different things that we're running through, and it could really almost interfere with how you find your cadence as a coach. So the autonomy that I've found and the trust that you guys have put forth into the coaches and myself to, obviously service at a super high level, but allow us to do so in a way that matches our coaching style has been amazing. But I think, that autonomy is probably the biggest standout for what's so different.
Yeah, this has been, kind of our mentality from the beginning with what we're building here is, my goal has always been, let me just get really good coaches and then just get out of the way. Like, let you do your thing, because I had the same experience when I was working big box gyms. Is like, there's so much, there's just so many little like procedures and rules, and, you can't do this, you have to do things this way. And I couldn't stand that. And, there's a reason for it most of the time, but like as a coach, you're kind of like, you're the lowest level in the business. So you don't have any insight into like what the reasons are for that. And so like looking at it as like a business operator, it's like, okay, I can see why you're doing these challenges, why you're doing these, the initiatives, and why we have procedures a certain way. But at the end of the day, it's like, that's getting in the way of like being a good coach. And it's like, what's the point of it? So that's always been kind of the mentality that we have is, can we just get really good coaches and let them do their thing, get out of their way, and then, try to provide as much support and like resources behind helping good coaches become great coaches, and, letting the coaches that are already great, allowing them to just get better and better, and also like help other coaches along the way. Like, I think that's one of the things that we did right here that is going pretty well. And, we're still figuring things out, but that allows, coaches like yourself, some of our other coaches that are really, really good, to just do a phenomenal job with their clients, but then also bring up the rest of the team around them. So, 100%. Like I think that's the way to do it. And we'll see. I think that'll be a challenge as we continue to scale, Because I think
Yeah.
every business, like I'm sure even like a Lifetime, some of those what we would consider big box gyms now. I'm sure even when they started, like, they might have had some of the same mentality, maybe, I don't know. As you scale, it gets harder, right? Because then you have like, 1, 2, 3 levels removed from your trainers to like your management. And so then you kind of have to develop some of these like procedural things. And so that'll be an interesting challenge for us, seeing how we kind of navigate that. But I think at the core of it is just like having really solid people, like really good people. And again, that's another thing that is like definitely a mind pump mentality. It's the way that the guys have ran the business this far, is like building people up from the inside rather than just like bringing outside people in. And I think that helps with that, because, we take somebody like, like myself, like yourself, like Cole, like some of our other killers on the team, and allow them to develop within what we're building. Then I think like that's what allows us to keep that that consistency across the team of like quality, keeping the same mentality. And I think that avoids some of the negative downsides of having some of those like procedural type of things. On that note, like one of the first things I kind of wanted to just dive into here with you is, what do you feel like is your like secret sauce? Like, what do you think makes you a good trainer? Because, you're clearly one of our best coaches, like, no question. What do you feel like it is that you do? I have some ideas, like I'll kind of give you some of the things I think, but I'm curious, like from your perspective, what do you feel like what's the thing that you do that makes you one of our best coaches?
Yeah, this is I would love to hear from an outside opinion looking in as well, but this is something that I've thought a lot about. And also when I did have my own team, something that I made sure to teach all of my coaches is I try to lead every conversation with very genuine curiosity. And what I mean by that is not only from the standpoint of what's going on with your nutrition, what's going on with your exercise, like all of those things. Those are actually kind of secondary to me. It's more like, as a person, the person sitting in front of me or in the screen in front of me.
Yeah.
What makes you tick? Like what is making you tick? What are your driving factors? What are you thinking of when we're going through this process? And trying to remove myself out of that, because it's very easy for us to get caught up in our favorite coaches' trends or thought processes or biases. And a lot of times they're based in really good things, but you can't copy and paste that on each person that you have in front of you. So I always sit there and I think, okay, how can I just be super curious about what's going on with this person, what's making them tick, and then use that information to help guide them to whatever solution we're working towards.
That's actually really interesting. I fully agree with that. I think that's probably one of the mistakes I made early on is you find some like cool training modality, or you see some cool like trainer or coach on Instagram that's actually reputable and that you trust. They're doing something and it's like, oh, well, let me experiment with that myself. Let me try it with some clients. And I think there's not necessarily anything wrong in that, but I think that's the trap that you can easily fall into, is like, let me just do this with all my clients. It worked for this person or it worked for me. Let me just, it's obviously it would work for all my clients, right? And so just like copy pasting across the board. So what you're talking about is it's customization, it's personalization.
Yeah.
This is personal training. This is like one-on-one coaching. So it should be personalized to what the person needs. I think a lot of coaches just have the tendency to kind of fall into routine, into patterns, and just checking boxes. Like, okay, I have a call scheduled. Let me just get the call done. Or I have a block of programming on my calendar. Let me just get that done, without really taking into consideration, what does this person actually need? Like, what is going on in their life that might indicate maybe switching things up or changing things. I actually think that's one of the best things you can do for client retention. When I look at what actually creates retention with clients, like when we're actually looking at hard metrics and data, I think what it comes down to, that I've found, and I'd be curious if you have anything that you would add to this or that's missing in this model, but I think it comes down to, first, your connection and relationship with the client. So like actually having a personal connection with the client. Second would be results. actually getting results. Your client can love you as much as they want to, but if you're not actually making progress with them, then like they're only going to stay for so long. And then the third, I think, would be kind of what you're talking about, which is like adaptability and customization for the different seasons of their life specifically, right? Because I think, maybe you have a really good connection with your client, good relationship, and they're making really good progress, but then something shifts in their life. They have some crazy, stress with their job, or maybe they get a job change. Maybe they have a baby. Like certain things may happen in their life that change the season that they're in. And if we just hold to the thing we've been doing, then they're going to stop getting results and then they'll drop off. So like when I think about what actually creates client retention, I kind of break it down to those three things. I think it pretty much can all fall down into those three categories. I'm curious if you've seen, if that's been the same experience that you've had, is like, if you would agree that those are the areas that create retention, or if there's anything you feel like is kind of missing from that.
No, I think those would basically cover it. I think it's worth talking a little bit more on the ability to like adapt or pivot though, especially if we start looking at the difference between in-person and online. So in-person training, you have the benefit of being able to make small adjustments the day of, right? And this is where I had a really good retention rate with my clients in person. And the common feedback I got is I would come in, you would know what's going on with my body better than I did and make changes on the spot. You have that client that comes in, they had a poor night of sleep, they've been super stressed at work, and it's like, we're not pushing today. And they're mad at you at the time because they came in, they're like, I want to work hard. And you're like, no, you don't. No, you don't.
Yeah.
And that's such a great skill you can have. Now that translates different when you're online, because obviously you're not with them session to session. So it's a lot more on the education piece of pointing those things out. You talk about it, the guys talk about it all the time of like, how do I forecast out what's going to happen? And it's having those conversations when they come up of, hey, like last night, you told me you had a bad night to sleep. So that's kind of why we expect to see these things happening. Next time we go into that, this is how I want you to approach it. And then I want you to give me that feedback so we can continue to adjust as needed. But you have to be a little bit more ahead of it in the online just because you're not there in the session. But yeah, I think that ability to pivot and be adaptable is really what sets coaches apart from just kind of the norm or the standard.
Yeah, you have to be proactive, right? Mm-hmm. I think that's the key with that is, I think some coaches, at least a lot of the online coaches that I've seen, I think it's kind of natural to just default to like being reactive, where it's like, oh, well, I'll wait for them to tell me this is going on, or we need to change things. Like I'm just here to do programming and nutrition. And I think that's the wrong way to go about it. Like, I mean, if you just want to, collect a paycheck and, coach some clients, it's like, whatever, that's what you're going to end up doing, is you're just going to end up coaching clients and collecting a paycheck. But if you really want to make, real lasting change in a client's life, and then also in turn have a sustainable business that keeps clients coming to you and showing up, I think you have to be proactive. You have to try to seek these things out before they happen. Because, I mean, we all know this, like anyone who's been coaching for, more than a little bit knows that you have to create like the change, right? You can't just wait for things to just happen. So I think that's one of the best things that you can do. What have you found as like your way of doing that in online though? Because I think that, like I said, I think it's really easy to just check boxes. What are some of the processes that you put into place? Is it in the conversations on your check-in calls? Is it your check-in process? Do you have like certain messages that you're sending out, asking questions? Like what sort of processes do you have in place so that you can be proactive, so that you're keeping your finger on the pulse rather than just like trying to react when something occurs?
Yeah. A big part of it comes back to what we were talking about earlier. It's that genuine curiosity. So anytime I am talking to someone, I'm digging deep into what's going on and trying to kind of see, oh, you know what, they've been talking about work stress accumulating. How do I get ahead of that? Or how do I at least let them know like where that road is going to take us if we continue doing the same things we're doing? But then there's other parts of it too. I'm very like analytical by nature. So I'm always kind of digging into what's going on with their nutrition, what's going on with their training. And if I notice something that's kind of out of the norm, then I'm going to ask questions to dive deeper and figure out what might be happening there. So we can start to notice patterns. Because all this really is it comes down to patterns. Everything's in a pattern. And if I can figure out what's causing pattern disruption, then I can get ahead of it and correct it before it happens. And then I think something that a lot of coaches miss on is setting expectations right from the beginning of how you want your clients to communicate with you. So on all of my onboarding calls, and usually for the first at least month that I'm working with someone, I am constantly reminding them, I want you to overshare with me. Like there is nothing that's off the table. Trust me, there's no information that's going to be irrelevant or uncomfortable or anything like that, because the more you give me, the easier it is for me to coach you, which then in turn makes it easier for you to get your results. So I just continually set that expectation right off the bat. So more often than not, they're picking up on that and getting into that groove in that first month. And then a lot of times I don't even have to pull that hard anymore because they're just pushing so much to me that I can just say, okay, cool. Like I can take all this data, I can look at what it says, have the conversations with you, and we can get out ahead of things that are going to come up in the future.
That's such a big point. This is something that I teach every new coach that comes on or especially if they're new to online coaching. That's the biggest difference between online coaching and in-person coaching. In-person coaching is like, it's all built around the sessions, right? It's all built around like you come in, you work out with me. You know, if I'm a really good in-person coach, then maybe we're having good conversation, that's productive during our sessions. But online coaching, you're not, you're doing check-in calls, I guess, depending on how you've structured things, but you don't have this dedicated time that they're seeing you multiple times a week, face-to-face talking. And so online coaching is all built around how you communicate. And so you have to have a process in place that allows for effective communication. And what effective communication looks like in online coaching is exactly what you're describing, is they are coming to you, sharing all of the details. They're coming to you, giving you enough information and data so that you can try to read the patterns and see what might be coming, down the line with this client. One of the hardest things to do as an online coach is coach a client who's like unresponsive and who gives you like 2-word responses. And it's like, we have to find a way to get that person opening up and sharing a little bit. Sometimes it comes down to just the structure of how how you've kind of laid things out. Like what do your check-in calls look like? What's your check-in process look like? What kind of messages are you sending throughout the week? Sometimes it's that. Sometimes it's just the personality. Like sometimes a client is just, that's their personality. Like I know if I were to be coached by a client online, that probably would be kind of my personality, is like pretty short responses, like not spending a lot of time, like, typing up these long text messages. So I think also being able to adapt to the personality of the client and finding a way to still get the data that you need. How do you typically go about that when you have a client that is a little bit less responsive? And, whether, I guess let me kind of like even separate this out a little bit more. Sometimes it's, like I said, the personality thing. And then sometimes it's the more of they're kind of falling off, right? Like they're losing consistency. And so they're not responding as much because they're kind of falling off the wagon. I'll kind of separate those for a moment. Like, let's just talk about the person that's like more the personality thing. Like it's just not really their thing to like, send these long messages and proactively message you, the coach, telling you what's going on. How do you go about that type of person?
Yeah, great question. I learned this in person because I had a client for a long time and like could not hold a conversation with him at all. Like it's just the whole session was quiet, and it came up to contract re-sign time. And I was like, oh, this isn't going to work. And so I brought it up and he's like, no, man, this has been absolutely wonderful. Like this is exactly what I wanted and needed. I'm like, oh, okay. Awesome. So I think it's just asking, right? Like it's almost, I've seen this with a lot of coaches. We almost get scared to just ask like, hey, this doesn't feel like I'm engaging with you the way that I would like to, but what's that experience like for you? Do you need me to change how we're communicating, or is this working for you? Because if it's working, like we don't need to fix anything.
Yep.
I just want to be aware so I don't feel like I'm not providing the service that you want.
That's such a good point. I think you're right. I think most coaches do have a hard time just doing that, just asking. I have seen it though. Some coaches, if you go too far, if you lean too far into that, then it comes across as like, you don't know what you're doing. And so you want to be careful the way that you do it, but absolutely, like, it's super effective if you can find a way to just ask those questions. And I think in order to be able to do that, they have to see you as trying and putting effort in, and, they have to see that you're competent. Because, I have seen this where, a coach is maybe not putting in like a ton of effort to really try to understand a client or try to help a client. And then they're over here asking like, well, you tell me like, what you need from me. Like, what do you want me to do? Like, and then it comes across as like, okay, what am I paying you for, dude? Like, you're supposed to be the one that's instructing me, not me instructing you. But if you do what you're saying, which is like, you're checking all the other boxes already. Like, you're already putting the effort in. You're already like, they see that you're there to help. And then you're asking like, is what I'm doing effective for you? Like, is there something that you feel like you need more of from me or less of? Like, then it's an open, honest conversation about like, tell me how I can best help you. Right. I think that's a very powerful thing. And so I think it's like, something tangible for a coach to do is just kind of audit yourself and ask yourself, like, number one, am I genuinely putting the effort in to help each of my clients individually? Like, literally go down your list, go down to your client roster and ask yourself, like, have I put in enough effort towards this client this week? Right. And then if you're, answering yes to all of that, and then it's okay to be like, okay, well, is there something that this client needs more or less of from me? And do I know what that thing is? And if not, I should go ask them. Right. Yeah. And this is why I would always include, I always included this in like my check-in form that I have a client fill out every week. Although it's also important to like ask them face to face, because sometimes they get kind of like routine with filling out that form that they don't really mention this. But I would always ask that question in my form, which was like, what do you need from me to succeed this week? Like, what is it that I need to change or keep doing that you're finding helpful or that you would find helpful? So asking some sort of question like that on a semi-regular basis, just to give you insight. Like I said, if it's in a form, they may like fill it out once or twice and then kind of just like, what I would typically get with clients is after they've done it a couple of times and they would just say like NA or like all good, thumbs up. But then like bringing it up in a face-to-face conversation and just seeing what they say. Sometimes they'll say something like, no, I think things are going really good. It's all good. And then they'll like proceed to tell you, but like, if you did this one thing, that would be cool. So it'll give you just some good information and good insight. I think that's a great idea.
Yeah, I try, because it's on my form too. But like you said, more often than not, you're not actually going to get a lot of information from that question on a form. I actually try to end all my calls with that. So any check-in calls I have, I always try to end with, all right, this is our action plan for the next week. Is there anything you need from me that will help you succeed at doing this? And that just opens the door. It's not putting them on the spot of like, oh, am I doing something wrong or anything like that? But it opens the door for them to have that conversation and open up a discussion if they want to. Sometimes the form is just not worth their while. They don't know how to formulate what they're trying to say. Or like you said, they don't even think about it because it's just like such a routine at that point that they're just like, yeah, NA, we're good. Yep. And then the next call you're on with them, they're like, by the way.
Yeah, it's so true. I think like this is just like a life skill. Just like learning to have direct conversations. I think it's so important. Like with your spouse, with your any sort of relationship, a friend, like your boss. Like I think learning to have these just direct conversations and like not beating around the bush. People are so afraid to hear what people think of them or to ask somebody what they think of them. Like it doesn't need to be this like scary thing. Just be direct and just be open and honest about it. Like, my job is to help you as best I can. So is there anything that you feel like you need more from me? Just asking that I think is good. And I also think there's a scenario where sometimes you kind of know as the coach, you kind of know that like things aren't really working super well right now. Like, and maybe you don't know exactly why, but you kind of I think most of the time you have a suspicion of like, I think I could be doing more for this client. And I think that's a scary scenario to ask them because you're afraid, like, what you're going to hear, but I think you just have to do it. You have to rip the Band-Aid. And like, that's an important conversation to have because it could be the difference between this person feeling like they just wasted 6 months with you and a lot of money or, wanting to re-sign and continue working with you because, even if the first 4 months didn't go quite as well as it could have, you had the direct conversation, you turned things around, and then they gave you another shot. So I think just, being direct, I think that's a life skill. Just learning to have those hard conversations.
Yeah. And I think there's two really good points that come to mind for that. For anyone listening who is trying to develop that skill of being direct, one of the easiest ways you can do it is just by asking if you can be direct. Hey, do you mind if I'm really direct with you? Or, hey, do you mind if I ask you a hard question? Like, those immediately pull down that wall and that barrier. Like, it's such an easy way to learn that skill. And as you go, I still use that question sometimes, but sometimes I just know that I can be direct because I've learned how people respond to things. But that is such an easy way to open that door to have those conversations. So I think really practicing that is super good. And then something you kind of alluded to is like not only being direct, but taking ownership. I've been doing this for 8-9 years, would consider myself a pretty good coach. I can't tell you how many times to this day I still will have a conversation with my client where I'm like, hey, I made the wrong decision here. This is why I made that decision. And I'll talk them through my thought process. I apologize that didn't take us in the direction I want us to go, but now we're going to pivot in this direction to try to correct that.
Yeah.
But taking that ownership, like you think that it's going to make you look bad, but it actually builds a tremendous amount of trust and it keeps the person invested in the process because otherwise they feel like they failed, which is the last thing we want, right? I'm okay saying I screwed up as a coach. Like it's inevitable. It's going to happen from time to time, but I'm going to own it and I'm going to move us into the next step. But I want to own that so you don't have to, because that sucks.
Yeah, I think it really helps if you do a good job of what you were talking about earlier with setting expectations. Mm-hmm. Like if you're setting the expectation and painting the picture like that this is a process that we're figuring out together, it kind of softens that a little bit as well. If they have that in their head of like, well, yeah, this is something that we're trying to figure out together, rather than it's like, I know all the answers. And so everything that I say is going to be perfect. Because then it makes it really hard in that scenario where they're like, oh, I trusted you. I thought you knew everything, So I think if you do a good job of setting that expectation of like, this is a journey and a process where we're trying to figure things out. Now, obviously you want to come across as competent. I know what I'm doing. I have experience. I'm very confident in the plans that we put forward, but at the end of the day, we're figuring this out together, right? Me as the guide, somebody that is a little bit further along the journey, like I'm helping you figure this out. We're doing this together. It's a process. And then, if you do take a wrong turn, owning up to it, being honest about it. Like, here's where we're at right now because of, where we decided to go, but here's how we're going to, course correct. And also like, there's always a positive that you can find in that situation too, so it's never, hopefully it's never like completely stepping backwards. Like, I don't think most coaches are, I think most coaches that listen to this and, definitely our coaches on our team, like, we're all competent enough that we're not going to give somebody such a horrible recommendation or take them in a direction that's like genuinely going to hurt them or move them backwards, but maybe just not make as much progress as we could have. And so there's still something in there that you can find and highlight as like a win, even if it's just as simple as like, maybe it was the wrong plan, but you stuck with it. You were consistent. That's a win, right? Yeah. And so pointing that out so that they do feel like they're winning. Because like you mentioned, that's the worst scenario you can find yourself in with a client is where they feel like they're failing. And so if you can continue to find something that's going well, even if they like are kind of like failing in certain areas, there's always something that you can find and highlight is like, you're doing really well here. And then you just keep highlighting that thing. And then at the very least, they'll continue to do that thing. And then the other things will come along later. This is like one of the biggest unlocks that I discovered in my coaching is how to actually create a shift in behavior and mindset is around celebrating the wins and highlighting the things that are going well. Because what happens is if you're constantly highlighting wins and reinforcing positive behaviors, then naturally your client will start to gravitate towards the right behaviors, right? So it's like, this is the example I use all the time because this is the most common thing that we see as coaches is somebody will come in with a goal that is aesthetic driven. They want to lose 20, 30 pounds, whatever it is, it's aesthetic driven. And the behaviors that they're doing with, they're along with that are, I would say like not beneficial for our long-term success. So maybe it's the chronic dieting, or it's the overuse of cardio. It's the overtraining. It's the on-off cycle of like going really hard and then falling off. If they keep doing that, then they're not going to see long-term results. And so what I need to do is I need to shift them into a mindset that is focused on health, and it's focused on, improving their relationship with fitness and nutrition, and kind of resolving the on-off, wagon, off the wagon, on the wagon, right? And so the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to find the behaviors that they're doing that are moving them in the direction I want them to go. And I'm going to celebrate that as a way of reinforcing those behaviors. And then we'll work on some of the other things that they maybe aren't doing so well in. And we'll slowly see if we can like pull those chips over from this side of the table that's not going well onto this side that, of things that are going well. And then as soon as I'm able to do that, as soon as they do a couple of things right in those areas, I'm going to celebrate it. I'm going to, highlight it, and that's going to reinforce that. And then they'll start to do that more and more. And then we just slowly start moving over these kind of habits and behaviors that they have. And so then we're basically like rewiring their brain to want to do the behaviors and the actions that are moving them in the direction that is going to get them the long-term success. And like, if you can figure that out with a client, or just generally as a coach, you're going to be such an effective coach. And this is why we talk so much about you hear us talk about celebrating wins all the time. That's a common verbiage that the guys use, is like highlighting the wins. But you'll also hear, internally, we talk a lot about proactive touch points and like the way that we use our messaging between our check-in calls, right? Mm-hmm. Like that's one of the most effective ways to do that as well, is just these simple text messages that we send throughout the week that are looking for those behaviors that are moving somebody in the right direction, and highlighting them so that a client feels like, oh, wow, that's a win, right? So that they feel like they're winning. They're doing the behaviors that we know are going to get them the long-term success and results that they really want. And then over time, the negative behaviors kind of just fall off, right? Like it's, I also, for that reason, I call it like reverse accountability, right? Like traditional accountability is like, you did something wrong, you need to do this thing instead. Reverse accountability is this concept that's exactly what we're talking about, is like, instead, I'm going to highlight the things that are going really well. And eventually you'll kind of just not want to do the things that aren't beneficial for us. So I don't need to hold you accountable on those things. Maybe every once in a while, I'll do a little bit of that, like course correction conversation. But for the most part, it's like, if I'm just over here pulling them into these good behaviors, then, that kind of does 99% of the work for you.
Yeah, I think that's such a strong point. And I think there's levels to it too, where what you don't want to create is where your celebrations feel routine. And what I mean by that is it shouldn't just be kind of like this monotonous, oh yeah, you're feeling like, you want to make it fun and exciting, because that's what makes things memorable for people. And when it's memorable for them, they want to repeat it. Like, that makes me feel good. Why wouldn't I not continue doing that? The second part of that, and you alluded to this a little bit, is when you can shift the dynamic of your conversations with your clients to be more focused around this. As a coach, you almost never actually have to bring up anything like negative, because what ends up happening is you celebrate, and then your client in the back of their mind knows, okay, this isn't working. I'm going to ask him about this. Rather than me having to dig in and say, oh, what about this? No, they bring it up to me and they're like, oh yeah, all these great things. What do you think about my sleep? It's like, oh yeah, great point. Let's talk about it, right? But now they brought it to you. So then also the buy-in for them changing that behavior is going to be that much stronger. You can't, almost never does it work to force someone in. Like it has to be their idea. And when you can line your conversations with these fun and exciting celebrations, people will start to bring you the ideas of what they need to change next. And then it makes coaching so much easier, and it makes it a much more powerful relationship.
Yeah. If I'm over here just looking like from the outside and seeing all the areas that somebody can improve in, and then I'm, coming to them saying, hey, your sleep's shitty. You're super overstressed. We need to work on that. You're not really getting enough steps. Man, protein is super low. And I'm over here telling you like, okay, here's all the things I want you to do now. It's like maybe a certain type of individual is able to like white knuckle that and, really force themselves to change. But that's not the majority of people. And so what you're saying is so powerful, because it's them coming to you. Like if somebody comes to me and says, ask the question like you gave the example of how's, what do you think about my sleep? Or they come to me saying like, hey, I've been getting kind of shitty sleep. What do you think about how can we improve that? Like if they're bringing it up, they're ready to make the change, right? So like they're in a place where they're ready to take the first couple of steps. If it's just me coming to them saying, hey, we need to work on your sleep, they're probably not in a place where they're ready to do that. Like, especially if, most people have legitimate reasons for not being optimized in certain areas, like sleep and stress and stuff. Like maybe they're not getting good sleep because, they just had a newborn and they have a really stressful job. It's like, okay, well, me going and saying, yeah, we need to be getting 7 to 8 hours of sleep. That's not really going to do much. But if they're coming to me, then it means they're in a season where they're ready to say, I'm going to make some changes here. And sometimes you can even just ask them that when they bring it up too, of like, well, yeah, it's definitely not perfect, but there's a couple things that we could do. Do you feel like you're ready to implement some of these things? Yeah. And they might say no, which is fine too. Because we want to make sure that we're not, again, coming back to what you said earlier, we don't want to set somebody up to feel like a failure, because then that just creates this downward spiral. Everything that we do needs to be, uplifting a client so that they feel like they're winning. And then eventually they're just going to continue to do the things that make them feel like they're winning, rather than being so, negative bias focused on the things that aren't going well.
Yeah, there's two questions that I really love asking, especially with a brand new client where I don't know what their tolerance for change is. I'll always ask someone like, hey, where do you think your biggest barrier or where do you think your biggest opportunity is? Because they're going to tell me where they see is going to be the thing that moves the needle the most. And then, I'll drill into that a little bit until we come up with a solution. And then I follow it up with, does that feel like a manageable change right now? And if they say no, then it's like, cool, that's not a problem. Let's drill it down a little more until it feels manageable, because I want you to get some forward momentum here. It doesn't matter how small of a change it actually is. I think Sal has the example of on the podcast where like he had a client where the thing that his client did for nutrition was read one article about nutrition a week, not even make any changes to diet, but like, that's my manageable change, right? Can I build momentum? And as long as we stay with that, eventually that'll evolve. So I think those are super powerful questions of, again, where do you feel like your biggest opportunity is? And does this feel manageable? Because it gives them, again, it's their choice to make that change now instead of just someone telling you what to do.
I love that. What do you think the best coaches do that maybe a beginner coach or somebody that's kind of new to coaching is probably not even thinking about?
Honestly, I think it just comes down to asking more questions. I think what I've seen a lot with newer coaches or coaches that are still developing is they're trying to prove their knowledge and tell what they know rather than asking the questions to learn what the client needs. Because in the beginning, it's all, I just change your macros and I just give you this workout program and everything should be hunky dory and we should be good to go.
Right.
But you and I know as experienced coaches, that's almost never the case. Every once in a while, you get one of those clients that's like, wow, that was easy. But more often than not, it's like, all right, we got to figure out what our roadblocks are going to be and all that stuff as quickly as possible. So again, we can get ahead of it. And the only way I'm going to do that is by asking a ton of questions. And when you feel like you've asked enough questions, you're probably about halfway there.
Yeah, I 100% fully agree. That would have been my answer to the question as well. And, we have a practice that we do here, we do it a lot with our in-person trainers here and it's actually more focused around like the sales side of things, but I think it's the same thing. Like, honestly, sales, we talk about this, sales is just effective communication and, effective coaching is just effective communication. It's the same thing. And so we have this practice that we do with our sales team that, it's the same application here and it's the same skill, is asking a question and then asking 6 follow-up questions. And that's really hard to do, but it gets your brain thinking in that mode and you'll start to find really creative questions that actually open up a lot of doors. And so I might ask you a question like, again, let's say like in the sales, in the sales context, it's like I might ask you a basic question like, well, what's your goal? What are you trying to accomplish? And you might say, I'm trying to lose 20 pounds. can I ask 6 additional questions from there? Like, you think about how deep you can drill after question number 6, like how open this person now would be if you were able to ask 6 follow-ups, like asking questions like, well, why 20 pounds? 20 pounds of fat or just 20 pounds on the scale? 20 pounds, like, is there a certain area that you're trying to lose 20 pounds? Like, is it from, the belly that you're kind of self-conscious about? Like, so asking all these follow-up questions will take you down like such a more meaningful path than just getting an answer that's like, oh, I want to lose 20 pounds. It's like, that doesn't really give me anything. It's like, yeah, okay, well, cool. I guess like we'll just put you in a calorie deficit for, 6 months and we'll probably be good. But it's going to give me a lot more insight. And so, kind of tying this to a coaching example, it's like, a client might tell you, yeah, I only got 1 workout in this week. And instead of just saying like, oh, well, yeah, we want to get 3 workouts in because that's probably what's going to be most optimal for, the goals that we have. And so we need to make sure we're doing that. Instead, it's asking questions. And instead of trying to be a teacher, we're trying to be a guide. And so it's like, oh, well, why'd you miss the 2 workouts? Was it just the schedule got busy? And then following up from there and just keep going deeper and deeper with more and more questions. And it's a really hard thing to do. Like, this is, anyone that's listening, like I would encourage you to try this. Like, just think of just a basic thing that you heard a client tell you recently, and then see if you can think of 6 follow-up questions to that. And it's really tough. You have to really kind of start to get creative. But if you start to exercise that muscle, then you'll start to just naturally ask better questions and you'll get better insight as a result of that.
Yeah, I think it's such an important skill. And when you look at it, almost always you're going to start very surface level and very logical, right? It's very exact. This is the data. There's nothing there. But the more questions you ask and the better you get at asking questions, the more it becomes an emotional topic. And that's where the money is in the conversation of sales, but also in just being a good coach. Because if I can connect with someone on an emotional level, that's when I've won as a coach. That's what's going to help me guide them through this experience, through this journey. For most people, you're not going to logic them there, right? Because at this point, you can look up all the information you need online. Yeah. That's not the missing piece. Like I said, every once in a while, you do get the person that just, whatever reason, they just needed you to tell them. Yeah. But for the most part, it's like, my goal is to get very emotionally deep with my clients as quickly as humanly possible. And the way you do that is through questions. And I think the other part of that is also being comfortable showing vulnerability, which ties back to when we talk about taking ownership and owning a mistake as a coach or things like that, sharing your experiences. I know you guys talk about that all the time of like, yeah, share your story too. If you can share your vulnerability and ask just an ungodly amount of questions, you build that connection so much more quickly, and it makes everything so much easier from there on out.
And the other reason asking questions is so effective is if I'm just telling you what to do, then you're not really learning anything. Like maybe a little bit, like you're kind of surface level learning some stuff, like some basic stuff like, oh, cool, I didn't realize that, whatever about protein or whatever. Like you might learn some surface level things. But when I'm asking you questions, it's getting you to think. And so it's kind of like, it's this way of getting the information deeper into your brain. Like you're going to actually learn something because it's almost like you've had to think through figuring it out rather than just me. Like, I mean, I think anyone can think of an example in their life where, they had to really figure something out for themselves and they learned it much more in depth because they had to go through that process, right? Like, I think that, think of like a guitar player who was self-taught and, maybe doesn't even know like the actual chord names and things like that. They're probably like, if they've been doing it for a while, like probably can get to a point where you're really, really good and you really understand music. Maybe you can't articulate it, as much as the professional who was professionally taught, but you're going to probably understand it at a deeper level than the person that just, took some classes and kind of like memorized like the finger patterns and things like, you're going to understand it at a deeper level. And so I think that's the goal with good coaching is, you hear Sal use the example of being a guide for your clients. And I think that that's how you do it. It's not just being a teacher that I'm telling you what to do. It's like, I'm guiding you through this process of figuring things out, right? Like even if you do know the answer as the coach, even if before asking all the questions, you already are pretty sure the direction we need to go, still asking those questions. So that way you're taking them along with you through the process because they're going to learn a lot more through that. it's like it paints a deeper picture, right? It paints a more complete picture rather than just like, you know, here's what you need to do. You know, that's the equivalent of like just taking a crayon and just like scribbling in a picture real quick.
Yeah.
It's like, we're really trying to paint the edges here. And the way we're going to do that is with these questions, you know, talking through the nuance, talking through like the specifics of their situation. I think that's absolutely something that makes a really effective coach.
You know, just this is going to pivot a little bit, but I think that the fastest or easiest way to learn this is hiring a coach yourself. I was extraordinarily adamant about when I had a team of trainers that worked for me that they had all worked with coaches at some point, because whether you get a good or a bad coach or a great coach, whatever, you're going to learn a lot from that experience of what's it like to be a client, because that's a very different side of the coin than being a coach. And you're going to firsthand get that experience of what does it feel like to have a coach that just talks at me versus what does it feel like to have the coach that seems to genuinely care about me. And you're going to pick up those pieces really quickly, and you're going to be able to say, all right, now I know what I do or don't want to do with my clients because that did not feel good or that felt great.
Yep.
So I would highly, highly recommend to anyone that has not hired a coach for themselves to do so and use that as a learning experience, not only for whatever that coach might specialize in, but also just communication. What's that feel like to be in the client's shoes?
I totally agree with that. It's like it gives you a reference point for perspective. It's like when you're like, if you've never been coached and you're just coaching, you don't really understand how things might come across. Like you don't understand how I say a certain thing, it might come through as maybe not what I intended. You don't really have any reference point for that. But if you have, you know, even if it's a bad example of a coach, you'll still have a reference point to give you perspective. So that way, you know, okay, when he says that way, it makes me feel frustrated or like I'm failing or whatever. So now you have a reference point where, okay, I'm going to make sure I'm not communicating like that. I want to make sure I'm communicating this way. And so I think it gives you a really good head start. In fact, one of your clients, Zach, we actually just hired, you know,
Yep.
So that's like a perfect example of this. We just hired Blake, who he's a young guy. He's new into training. But you know, I had him out here for a week internship, and I mean, he's going to pick things up extremely quickly. And a big part of that is because he has the experience working with you and he's seen how you coach. And so now he has that perspective. And so now he has a starting point that's ahead of, you know, just your average person that's never really worked with a coach and they're just trying to figure things out, probably just mostly based off of the things that they've done with themselves, training and nutrition wise. So yeah, I think that's a great point that I don't think a lot of people really consider, but I consider that it's an investment, you know, it's education.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, at this point, you know, I have to get continued education and I'm going on 8 or 9 years. So I've been through a lot of certifications. None of them touch the surface of what I've learned from working with multiple coaches. Mm-hmm. Like, bar none, best investment you can make into accelerating your growth as a coach. And again, sometimes you're not going to get the best coach. Maybe they're a really good marketer and they're a shitty coach, but you can still take things and learn from that of, okay, I don't want to coach that way, but maybe I do want to market this way, right? Like, so there's things you can always learn from that, but you're never going to learn faster than just investing in having someone teach it to you like that.
Yep, fully agree. I love that. Awesome, man. Well, I think this was good. I think this was a good conversation. We'll definitely have to do this again. I think. Yeah. And we'll see how the audience likes it. I'm sure they'll love it because, you know, again, I get a lot of good feedback on our episodes that we do with Cole and Corinne. I think people love just hearing people that are in the thick of it, you know, doing the thing, coaching clients and doing a good job at it. So, yeah, like I said, you're one of our best coaches. So I think that this is, you know, really valuable for the people listening.
Yeah, I appreciate you having me on, man. I hope that everybody likes it and takes away some gems. I think we had some really good topics here and got into some really important things.
Awesome, man. Appreciate it.